and gentlemen, these past 4 years, we have suffered no shortage of words in the White House. What is missing is leadership in the White House.
The man who would be vice president, Paul Ryan, introduced himself to the country last night. Patrick O'Connor, Wall Street Journal's Patrick O'Connor, joins us in Tampa this morning. Patrick, how did he do?
Well, it was a pretty full-throated indictment of President Barack Obama. I think a lot of people had expected him to spend the bulk of his speech talking about who he is, but he instead decided to focus at the two people at the top of the ticket, his running mate Mitt Romney and the president. He kind of painted a picture we've seen before from Republicans, but I think he did it in a lot sharper terms, especially speaking about the president and how he has contributed to running up the deficit, but also in his inability to rejuvenate the job market more than he has. So he did pretty well. It was a fairly well-crafted speech.
What was
Ryan is new to the national stage, so I think it took him a little while to get warmed up as he delivered the address. But otherwise, I think they scored a lot of points that they needed to score, and they were unable to score the first night of the convention.
What was the vision of the country that Paul Ryan really laid out?
Well, he laid out a vision that he has articulated for 4 years now, which is that of a much smaller federal government, where the social safety nets that have been around since the 1960s would take on a much different form. As you guys know, he has a plan to reform Medicare that would basically transform it from an open-ended promise to more of a subsidized, federally subsidized private insurance plans. And he embraced that last night. He said, we want to be honest with you about the fiscal picture for the country, and that we have answers. Now, these are not answers that have been politically palatable in the past, so it's a gamble for Republicans. But to his credit, he was up front with the audience last night and talked about his Medicare reform, maybe not in the most specific terms, but he really tried to own up to it as much as he could. And they said, listen, we want a smaller government than our competitor does, and that's really been a central plank of his policies for the last 4 years, and is starting to become more a central plank for Mr. Romney.
And he also showed a little bit of humor last night. We have a clip for everyone.
We're a full generation apart, Governor Romney and I, and in some ways we're different. There are the songs on his iPod, which I've heard on the campaign bus, and I've heard it on many hotel elevators. He actually urged me to play some of these songs at campaign rallies. I said, look, I hope it's not a deal breaker, Mitt, but my playlist, it starts with AC/DC and it ends with Zeppelin.
Of course, Mr. Ryan, he seemed to connect with the Republicans in the hall. Did he connect with independent voters?
Well, it's a good question. A lot of the policies that they've laid out don't test very well in polls. I think what he was trying to do was kind of humanize himself a little bit. The other thing that's interesting with that clip that you just showed is that he's pointing to a generational difference between himself and Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney does really well with older voters over the age of 60. He doesn't do quite as well with some of the demographics a little younger. And obviously Paul Ryan at 42 is younger. He appeals to a younger generation. And so I thought infusing a little humor into his speech last night was probably a good thing to kind of humanize himself and introduce himself to a younger generation as they make this pitch that the country needs major fiscal reform.
I want to ask one last question very quickly, Patrick. Tell us, he criticized President Obama for the Bowles-Simpson Commission, and yet he was on that commission, correct? And he voted against it.
Yeah, I believe he also criticized the president for cutting $716 billion from Medicare, and he includes those cuts in the last version of his budget. So, I mean, this was a convention speech. This is politics, and they're going to be lobbying charges that may seem a little specious to people who know a bit more of the details. That obviously was one of the attacks that I think caused a lot of people pause this morning.
Great. Patrick, thank you so much. Of course, tonight you will be in Tampa. You'll be paying attention. We'll have another roster of speakers. Marco Rubio will be the headliner as he introduces the Republican nominee, Mitt Romney.